If you think safety comes from money, cameras, and high walls, this story might change your mind, because sometimes the real danger isn't the stranger outside the gate, but the silence inside your own home. Daniel Mercer was not a man who came home early. In fact, his schedule was so predictable that even the staff joked you could set a clock by it. So when his car turned onto the private drive of his hillside estate in North Carolina, just after sunset instead of well past midnight, the security lights flickered on as if surprised, and the biometric gate slid open with a soft mechanical sigh, recognizing him instantly, welcoming him back into a place designed to be untouchable. The estate sat wrapped in stillness, manicured lawns glowing silver under the fading sky, tall windows reflecting nothing but quiet, and as Daniel stepped inside, loosening his tie, he felt something he couldn't immediately name, a pressure in the air, a heaviness, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Everything looked immaculate, almost staged. The marble floors polished to a mirror shined the artwork perfectly aligned, the faint scent of lavender from the automated diffusers floating gently through the hallway. He called out casually for the twins, for Noah and Nathan, expecting the usual delighted squeals or the soft voice of their caregiver answering from somewhere upstairs, but instead there was only silence, thick and unnatural. And then he heard it. Not a scream, not even a cry, just a broken, trembling breath, the kind that carries fear inside it like glass. Daniel didn't think. He ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his pulse hammering in his ears, so loudly it drowned out everything else pushing. Opened the nursery door only to find it empty, cribs, perfectly made stuffed animals arranged neatly as if waiting for a photograph, baby bottles washed and drying in a tidy row. Nothing disturbed, nothing chaotic, and that made it worse. His stomach dropped as he turned toward the master suite, the hallway stretching longer than it ever had before. And when he stepped inside the bedroom, time seemed to shatter into fragments. His sons were sitting on the floor near the bed, their tiny ankles bound loosely together with soft cord, not tight enough to hurt, but tight enough to trap, their wide eyes wet and confused, and beside them, slumped against the carved wooden bedpost, was Maria Alvarez, their caregiver for nearly 2 years, her wrists secured above her head, her mouth sealed with tape, her dark hair falling across her face, her eyes wide with a terror that hadn't yet turned into tears. Daniel crossed the room in a blur, dropping to his knees, fumbling to free the boys first, his hands shaking so violently he nearly couldn't untie the knots, whispering their names over and over, as if repetition could undo what had happened. And once they were free, he pulled them into his chest for a single desperate second before moving to Maria, ripping the tape from her mouth with more force than he meant to, ignoring the sting in his own fingers as he tore at the restraints, cutting into her skin. She coughed hard, drawing in air like someone who had been underwater too long, trying to speak, but unable to form coherent words, her voice breaking apart into fragments of panic and shock. There was no broken glass, no shattered locks, no alarms blaring. The security system panel downstairs still glowed green, showing all clear, as if nothing had ever happened. And that was the detail that chilled Daniel the most. The police arrived quickly, too quickly, he would later think, as if someone had been waiting for the call, red and blue lights flashing silently across the perfectly trimmed hedges. Officers moving through the house with controlled urgency, while paramedics checked the children and Maria for injuries. Physically, they were fine shaken, but unharmed. And yet the house felt violated in a way that couldn't be measured by bruises. When detectives reviewed the surveillance footage, their expressions tightened. 3 hours of recordings had been replaced by a seamless loop of empty hallways and quiet rooms, expertly done, almost elegant in its precision. Who else has full access to your system? One detective asked, and Daniel hesitated because the list was short, and every name on it belonged to someone he trusted. Maria sat nearby on the living room sofa, gently rocking, Nathan in her arms, while Noah slept against her shoulder, humming a soft lullaby under her breath, as if instinctively trying to stitch the atmosphere back together. She did not cry, did not protest, did not defend herself when questions were asked. She simply stayed close to the boys, her focus entirely on their comfort. By midnight, word had leaked an estate like Daniel Mercer's didn't attract quiet attention, and by morning, news vans were parked beyond the gates, headlines already forming narratives that were easier to digest than the truth. Wealthy executives' children targeted, caregiver under scrutiny, insider involvement suspected. Suspicion, once released into the world, moves faster than facts, and Maria felt it settle over her like a shadow. Daniel watched it unfold with a growing sense of unease, because while the media dissected her background and speculated about motives, he knew something didn't fit. Maria had been the steady center of his children. S-World since they were 6 months old, the one who sat beside their cribs during fevers, who learned they're different. Cries who sang off-key lullabies that somehow always worked, and the idea that she would orchestrate something so calculated felt not just unlikely, but absurd. Refusing to rely solely on the official investigation, Daniel began quietly reviewing internal company records, something he hadn't done personally in years, combing through security contracts and software updates. And what he found tightened the knot in his chest. A backdoor protocol had been installed into the estate, a surveillance system months earlier under the guise of a routine upgrade authorized by a senior security consultant named Victor Holly, a man who had access to Daniel's corporate defense contracts and had recently been passed over for a promotion tied to a multi-million-dollar government project. The breach wasn't random, and it wasn't about the children, not primarily. It was a warning, a calculated demonstration that Daniel's fortress could be entered at will. While investigators followed the digital trail, uncovering financial transfers and encrypted communications that painted a clear picture of internal sabotage, Maria continued showing up each morning, at the same time her posture quiet but unbroken, as if refusing to let fear dictate her loyalty. Several times, Daniel offered her paid leave, telling her no one would blame her for stepping away, especially under public scrutiny. But she shook her head gently and said the boys needed consistency more than anything. And so she stayed reading to them in the sunlit playroom, taking them for short walks in the garden once the reporters had thinned, rebuilding their sense of normal one small routine at a time. When Victor was finally arrested, evidence stacked neatly against him: financial motives, system access logs, falsified credentials. The public narrative shifted almost overnight. Outrage replacing suspicion, apologies appearing in quiet corners of the internet where accusations had once been loudest. Daniel held a press conference not to discuss profits or contracts, not to reassure shareholders, but to address something far more personal, standing before cameras with a steadiness that surprised even him as he spoke about trust, about how easily fear can distort perception, about how the first instinct of many had been to question the woman who had protected his sons, rather than the man who had betrayed professional confidence for personal gain. He publicly thanked Maria, calling her not an employee but a guardian, someone who had placed herself between vulnerability and harm without hesitation. And though she stood slightly behind him during the statement, uncomfortable with attention, there was a quiet strength in her posture that needed no amplification. The estate gradually softened after that. Additional security was installed, yes, but Daniel also made changes that had nothing to do with locks or cameras. He reduced his travel schedule, delegated more responsibilities at work, began coming home for dinner, more often learning the rhythms of bedtime stories and bath time splashes that he had previously only heard about through updates and photos. The house that once felt like a museum of success began to feel like a lived-in home, laughter echoing through hallways that had once carried only silence. Maria never asked for recognition beyond what she had already been given, never demanded compensation for the stress or the headlines. What she asked for, quietly, was presence. She encouraged Daniel to be there for the twins in ways that money could never substitute. And in doing so, she shifted something fundamental inside him. The incident that had started as a violation became unexpectedly a turning point, not because of the fear it caused, but because of the clarity it delivered. Protection is not just about barriers. It is about people, about the ones who stand steady when chaos tries to rearrange everything. Months later, when the twins were laughing in the backyard under a bright afternoon sky, Daniel found himself watching Maria chase them playfully across the grass. Her earlier terror replaced by genuine joy, and he realized that legacies are not built only in boardrooms or sealed contracts, but in moments like this, in choosing loyalty over suspicion, gratitude over pride, and presence over performance. If this story reminds you that quiet courage often goes unseen until it is tested, and that trust is one of the most powerful forms of strength we can offer each other, consider supporting the stories that highlight these truths. Like, share, and subscribe to Voice of Kindness so more real stories of resilience and integrity can reach those who need them. Because sometimes the most important lessons come not from the loudest voices, but from the steady ones who choose to stay.